Can we please give a warm welcome and a shout out to Dream Hampton for the film, It Was All a Dream. As many of you know, I call Amsterdam my home, but it's really deep to have home visit me in Amsterdam. And Dream is home to me. So thank you and welcome. Yes. Yeah, so I'm the type of person that will watch that film probably 6 more times in my life because it is so rich with references that it will take me, several more times to really kind of continue to understand the impact and just Dream's lens in particular. But the film is important to different people for different reasons, and it reminds me of Prince in this way that, who was a Gemini, who in this way that, that teaches us what it means to be dynamic and curious and skilled to such a degree that they offer you multiple entry points. So you have people who are fans of Prince and the Revolution. You have people that are fans of Prince and the New Power Generation. You have folks that are, down with Prince from the Rainbow Children, right? That there are many entry points. And that is how I understand Dream Hampton's work, that this film is a fraction, and it's really important, it is a fraction of what she offers us and what she's offered us over the period of, quite honestly, over 35 years. So I just wanted to kind of situate us in this place where we understand that we are witnessing and having access to just a dynamic thinker. So.
Okay.
Yes,
Let's get to it.
So I'm going to start, by talking a little bit about why the film is important to me, and I'm assuming maybe perhaps why I've been invited to be in conversation with Dream again. And by the way, Dream was the first person who I spoke to about a book that I wrote, which was an honor to me, not just because she is part of, the glue that made that book possible, but because she is someone whose work I have studied and therefore has shaped me, right? That she has shaped me alongside our mutual friend, Greg Tate, folks like Bell Hooks, just so many thinkers that help me understand what it means to be both scholar and practitioner, but also intellectually curious. So Dream is important to me for many reasons, but that's just kind of one of them. The other thing is that the film properly positions women as people who have the knowledge and courage to critique and to listen closely with discernment and essentially shape the culture, right? So we just celebrated 50 years of hip hop, and I am not sure that we have a very, very clear idea of the role that queer folks, trans folks, women, right, contributed to that 50 years, right? And so I think the film also does an incredible job of positioning women as scholars of the culture and folks who are contributing to it. And so, I want to also talk about where Dream is from, which is Detroit. And it is one of the most important American cities for so many reasons. I am a daughter of Detroit. I'm not from Detroit, but I'm a student of Detroit, in fact. And so, just understanding Detroit in the context of capitalism and the post-industrial creative hub that gave us Motown, that gave us Aretha Franklin, that gave us the blues through John Lee Hooker, that gave us jazz through Yusef Lateef, that gave us the development of Stevie Wonder, that gave us the Jackson 5, that gave us Marvin Gaye, that gave us Jay Dilla, that gave us techno. Because techno is Black Detroit music, right?
This is true.
And sorry to take up all this space, it's just so important because while we think about Dream as this hip hop scholar, we're gonna get into that, she actually played a key role in kind of helping, well, not even helping, but dancing alongside the formation of techno, right? Like many subcultures she's been part of, and not just as a passive consumer, right? So I just wanted to put that in the air, but also the fact that I am from Los Angeles. Detroit and LA are cousins. And I say that because in 1971, Motown moved to LA. The Jacksons moved to LA. At one point, Aretha moved to LA where she recorded in Watts her largest selling album to date, Amazing Grace, right? So there's this really important relation. Diana Ross moved to Detroit, to LA, right, from Detroit. So we are cousins, and we are in this conversation. Dream, welcome.
I love that. I'm so glad that introduction is on camera. I'm going to cherish that. Thank you.
Yes, so your archive is what we're talking about here.
Yes, we are.
So having the opportunity to witness you own your narrative and resist a kind of erasure. I'm just curious about why now? What made you share this incredible work with us now?
Yeah. The answer is not so very poetic, you know. This footage, I was an NYU film student in the early 90s, and I had a class where I was to do a 45-minute documentary just to pass the class. And I said, I wasn't working, I only worked at the Source for 18 months when I was 19 years old. So sometimes I feel like that gets overstated, you know. But at the time, I was a film student, and I thought I would go back and do a 45-minute piece about the Source. And so the reason that there's some footage in the office is, and the Source was a hip-hop magazine in the early 90s. I came on as a photo editor. They were still using black and white publicity shots. And I brought in people like Chimo Du, who you may have seen shooting Onyx, and some other folks. I brought in the creative, Greg Tate actually introduced me to a designer from the Village Voice, and we brought him in to get the look and feel of the Source right. And then something happened in Los Angeles. And I'm just realizing how many people were at this party. I just found this out from a B-girl named Christina when I was on a call with Dee Barnes. But Dee Barnes, who had a video show called Pump It Up, became the only person who was physically attacked in the first great, not the first, but because I'm looking at KRS-One, but one of the big hip-hop beefs, which was the dissolution of NWA. So NWA are falling apart. They are accusing each other of theft, of exploitation, financial exploitation. They're writing terrible songs about each other, that they should be lynched, that they're Jerry curl, they should be set on fire by their Jerry curls, like all types of insults are flying back and forth. And Dee Barnes is the one, 100-pound, 5'3" woman is the one who ends up being attacked by Dr. Dre. And so when I was in the office, the staff, we had heard about it, this is before social media. Oh, who I learned was at this party was Tupac was at the party. Shock G from Digital Underground had a limousine parked outside of the party where Dee Barnes was assaulted, and he had sex workers inside the limousine, and men were lined up to have sex acts performed on them outside of the party where Dee Barnes was attacked, right? I know, I didn't know that either. Anyway, hip hop. So I don't like, so I'm answering your question pretty like didactically, but I'll also kind of back up a bit and talk about like my relationship to the tapes, because this very much mirrors my relationship to hip hop. So I wrote about Dee Barnes. I said, well, we have to write about this. No one in the office, they thought it was awful that Dee Barnes was in New York. She was at Russell Simmons' house. And they had all gone over to Russell Simmons' house. Dee happened to be there. She was wearing sunglasses. They said, oh, it must be true. She does have a black eye. She was bruised. And I said, oh, okay, what are we going to do about it? And they were like, oh, well, it's fucked up, but, it's not our business. And so then that became my very first editorial. To his credit, John Schechter, one of the founders of The Source, gave me the editorial page, and I called Dr. Dre a bitch for attacking Dee Barnes. So that's the very first thing I wrote at 19 or 20. And so then I was at war with NWA, and that was fun. And Suge Knight, and so whatever, that was that. And then, so that was the first thing I like wrote for them, right? And I say that because that's when and where I enter hip hop. There is both an aesthetic moment, like why are y'all running these black and white publicity photos that they're giving you? Like get some photographers, let's go out to Long Island. If let's shoot EPMD with their little matching Mercedes. And so there's a formal aesthetic relationship to it, like maybe we all had. And then there's like the reality of it, that this particular violence was, visited on this small woman, right? So I began shooting the doc for the class, and every time things would get good in the meetings, they would kick me out. They just didn't understand. I was watching like Titty Cut Follies and all of these docs and learning, what verite was, and they were trying to protect their brand, again, hip hop. And so they would kick me out of the rooms. And so I told Biggie, who was my friend and neighbor, I was like, yo, I'm going to get an F if I don't, finish this class. And he was like, yo, ma, just come shoot me. And that's how it started. And then that film, I thought it was going to be called And It Don't Stop. And then it really did stop for me. After Pac and Biggie's murders, definitely by 98, by the time the Fugees, by the time people are super excited by records that I find deeply mediocre, I just pull out, I stop caring. And so I still so I don't have a relationship with hip hop after 1998, really, So I don't use it as a framework. The organizing that I was doing at the time was with the Malcolm X grassroots movement. We went on to successfully sue the city of New York to end stop and frisk. We did a benefit concert to bring political prisoners home, which has happened at this point. So many PPs that we didn't think would be home are home. I always rejected KRS-One way before he was a rape apologist for Africa Bambaataa, which is a big part of the 50th anniversary that didn't get discussed. It was such a whitewashed affair. So way before KRS-One was a rape apologist for Africa Bambaataa, I rejected his 5 tenets of hip hop, that dance, graffiti, DJing, emceeing, and I guess knowledge. I look at hip hop, I think that culture has food, I know we use culture in all these ways, throw it around, office culture, the culture of my taxi, my Uber or whatever. But culture has food, and hip hop does not have food. What hip hop is a iteration of Black youth culture, American Black youth culture. And American Black youth often means Jamaican Black youth, West African Black youth, all of the things that it is. So for all of those reasons, in that I hope I just unpack the misogyny, the concern for brand, even back then, the mediocrity of what would turn out to be a lot of the aesthetics of it. There was a time when the music was disruptive, and it stopped being that a long time ago. Trisha Rose, on a debate that I was on with Michael Eric Dyson. Every time I say a man's name, I could give you some kind of comma and whatever, but Michael Eric Dyson had us arguing in London for the for and against hip hop, and I was sadly on the for team. And Trisha Rose won the whole debate when she said that hip hop is the cultural arm of capitalism, and I was like, oh yeah. So those tapes sat in different spaces. Every time I moved, I've lived in LA, I've lived in different places, those tapes would just find their way into a new storage space. So they weren't treated. So when you're watching the Snoop footage and you see the degradation of it, you're seeing that there's warping, you're seeing the lack of care for my own archive, right? So that's what you're witnessing. So the question of why, even though I moved out of my storage space. My daughter, she and I were sharing one. Everyone was asking me to do 50th anniversary, whatever, and I was like, no, thank you. I've never listened to a Kanye West album. I don't know what Jay-Z's doing. I think he's rapping about taxes or his marriage or whatever. And I don't know. Isn't that what 444 is about? Taxes, investing, and marriage, I think. I don't know. But I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it's grown up.
I'm sure it's good.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, again, so you answered all 10 questions that I had. First of all, what the hell am I here for? I love it though because you forced me to think about this other thing that I'm so moved by, which is the question, and which you handle so well in the film, which is the question of music and place and like black music geographies, right? And because I want to zero in on your knowledge. I understand that where you stand with hip hop and saying that is dead, and in fact saying that it is not a culture, and in fact saying that we have become so obsessed with ourselves, right? That and sort of
Well, people would say it's very much alive. Yeah,
right. No, it's a major it's a major argument.
My lack of interest has nothing to do. I would not try to project that. Like I get to be the old person who's uninterested.
Yeah.
So growing up in Detroit, I wasn't around for Motown. It's the 70s. I grew up in an era of Motown reviews.
Yeah.
Right? So there would be like the Temptations and be only one original member of the Temptations in the review, right? The 25th anniversary of Motown, we're all gonna be in our pajamas to watch Michael Jackson, like, moonwalk on stage or whatever. So it was already in its being historicized. It had already happened. And so now there was just this thing of it being like in museum spaces, in a way that we were talking about it, right? But I think that people feel, and I went to the pop-out, don't ask me why, but I ended up at Kendrick Lamar's pop-out. So I'm sure that people very much feel that hip-hop is alive right now.
No, that makes sense. Well, but still, I want to get to this question of music and place with you and knowledge. Because you move from place to place. We are in the car with you and Biggie, right? And you move through Brooklyn. You land in LA, right? And not just in LA, you go to Venice Beach, which is where I used to go on Sundays to see Ice-T and the Rhyme Syndicate and just be like, those are the rappers we're hearing, right? You move, you end up in Philly. You go back to Brooklyn. You're on a ferry with Method Man going to Staten Island. But in each place, you are asking these like questions that are directly related to these regional rhythms, right? And so Cypress Hill, this like Latino group that you give a platform to as well, and they get to say that we are part of this. It would have been interesting to see you interview the Booyah Tribe. But I say that, Samoan rappers, but I just say that to acknowledge like what you were walking with, the information you were walking with, and sort of giving us tools to ask questions about place and music and thinking through sound in that way.
So, and so I say all that preamble to say, but this film is very much like a love letter to the era of hip hop that I cared about and loved, right? And one of the things that was happening in that office at the Source where I was they were very New York centric. It's kind of the story of how New York lost hip hop happens in that office, right? They really were champions of Tim Dog's Fuck Compton. Like, they really thought that was a good record or an answer to the Chronic, and it so wasn't, right? And the reason that they let me do my two big cover stories that I wrote for The Source were after I was on the staff, and it was a cover story of Snoop, which was after the footage. So when I go to interview Snoop, I'm there as a filmmaker. He has never read any of my articles. When I'm with Biggie, it's because he's my neighbor. He had a demo that he submitted to The Source magazine. They had a column called Unsigned Hype. And like Mobb Deep, who were Poetical Prophets, when they submitted their demo to the Unsigned Hype, Biggie had submitted his demo to Unsigned Hype. So I remember telling Puff, who at the time drove a Volkswagen, that you should hear this tape that Maddie has, right? And so that's how Maddie and Puff got together to hear Biggie's demo, right? You see in the film that I'm introducing Snoop to Puff to be on the Mary J. Blige, what's the 411 record, right? But in the Source offices, like, they were very anti-West Coast, but being from Detroit, where I had grown up, I learned, it's funny that you talked about Prince, because as a middle school child, much too young and definitely the wrong sources, but I learned about sex from Prince and Too Short, right? I mean, I'm sorry to have to, yeah. There are so many good books that you can give your child now to talk to them about sex, or, guides on how to have conversations, but I didn't have those. I learned about sex from Prince and Tupac, right? From music. And so I didn't have an anti-West Coast bias. I didn't feel like that was a lesser sound that was coming out of the East Coast. In fact, when you see Cypress Hill listening, they're listening for the first time in that footage. That was the first time they ever heard Wu-Tang. Yeah. So even though I don't have them being interviewed or anything, I thought that moment was special, that it was like there was this group that was kind of disruptive. They were far more students of the Beastie Boys or in that lineage than they are of like what's happening on the West Coast. But there are different West Coast sounds, and yeah.
And so, I'm sorry sorry to interrupt
you.
No,
no, Keith, let's not
get to that, because I'm like, I feel so seen as a Cali woman that you find yourself in Leimert Park, and you have footage of, Jurassic 5, yes. You talk about Freestyle Fellowship, yes. But you have footage of Richard, who was the owner of a place called Fifth Street Sticks, which is where we used to go to see rappers rhyme with live bands, like to cover them in the era where NWA ruled the West Coast sound is very important work in this film. And so
thank you.
Talk about that.
I was so proud of 22-year-old me for being smart enough to talk to this elder, and to get. And he was like, in 30 years, I was like, I'm going to still be listening to hip hop in 30 years. Like, no, I wasn't going to be listening to hip hop 10 years from then, right? But he was so prophetic. He was talking obviously about what had happened to jazz and the commodification of jazz and losing jazz. And so when I was talking to Aruna upstairs about, or even just now about, hip hop being an obsolete or a date. We were trying to find the word in Dutch for obsolete, but an outdated framework. Like if you were to talk to young people, they are as likely to tell you that they have ADHD, that they're pansexual. Like they're not gonna lead with I'm hip hop or whatever. It was a framework that we used to organize like politically. But then Aruna said, well, there are values that we got through hip hop. And she said, each one teach one. So she's talking about knowledge and wisdom. Of course, that's a Swahili, saying. It's one that we, that comes through, basically activism and kind of cultural nationalism, Pan-Africanism. But okay, if you learned it through hip hop, that's fine and valuable. But I think about the values, back to this conversation with Richard, and just having sat through Maroon Time, a short film on the other side. Tina Camp is here, incredible scholar whose work has shaped me, and recommended that I go see the film that she was just in conversation about. So a dancer who very much, if you are into hip hop dance, he'll remind you of Storyboard P. But they had a whole conversation that I missed about South African jazz. So when I think about Richard talking to us about jazz, I think about the values of jazz that we then call hip hop. Like how things, so even the idea that things like improvisation, some of the things that we think of tenets of hip hop have actually an older chain of custody. And so that if we just talk about Black cultural production, and different genres of music, then we won't ascribe these kind of big values and things that actually belong to several different genres.
No, absolutely, the subgenres within that. But so I want to also talk about your writing voice and the role that it plays in the film, because I've had the privilege to see several cuts, several edits of the film, and I arrived at the final cut with so much respect for your approach to writing as a craft at that time. And can you talk about how you arrived at the decision to kind of speak using the voice you were writing with, right? So literally sampling yourself. You sampled yourself, you sampled your work and applied it to the text, the visual text.
Now I'm trying to, because I just said that about jazz and improvisation, my brain was like, what other things that are true of jazz, that are true in hip hop. And I was thinking about sampling being a possible unique thing. But then I think about, and I know this is interpretation, not sampling, but when you take a Gershwin song and you make it 20 minutes, and you extend it to 20 minutes, as Coltrane would do, or, then there is something in that too. But my voice, so what you hear me, the narration for those who saw the film, because I know some people wandered in from the other room, the narration, it was very important to me that temporally, that this film all exists in a particular era. That like 53-year-old me isn't trying to talk to 23-year-old me. Because that was one of the principles of our movement at the time. Like all Black culture, we're looking for answers amongst ourselves, right? There is some reaching forward, which is what the sampling is, right? Like to dig in the crates. And that means back then it meant reading Cabral, it meant reading Biko, it meant obviously reading Malcolm. For me, it meant reading also Bell Hooks and Paula Marshall and other people. But it was important for me to not be lecturing my current self, to not have myself in 2024 with all that I know about what happened, all of the disappointment that I have in this particular genre of music that many of you might call a culture, to not like put that on my 22-year-old self. And what the feedback I was getting from the film, it was called I Used to Love You. And another friend suggested it was all a dream. And that isn't a reference to Biggie, it's not a reference to my name, it's a reference to memory and the ways in which we look back on the past with kind of a golden haze, the edits that we do, whether it's our childhood. I've been thinking about memory a lot. My last film, Freshwater, dealt with that too. So anyway, long story long, I was being told that they wanted more of me in it. This is by studios, by people, early eyes who were on it. None of the studios bought it, by the way. It's still unsold. But they said they wanted more of me in it. And so that meant that I had to narrate. And I didn't want to do walk and talk. Like, one of the amazing things about our generation of Black young people in the 80s and 90s is that we actually weren't explaining ourselves. Like, the one thing that we did get right is we got rid of the politics of respectability. Like, if like feminists burn their bras, then we did the equivalent of burning our belts, right? Like, it was like we let it sag, we let the N-word fly, like any ideas of like respectability. And this is in an era where America, where we, in many ways, in mainstream culture, had pivoted to like buppies, right? So the materialism is there, the hypercapitalism is there, but the idea of a respectability politic was gone. So I keep losing my thought, but those articles, I'm reading from my article, to answer your question directly, I'm reading from articles, none of the articles are written after 1997. So everything that you hear me saying was my editor's idea, and it's me reading stuff I wrote back then. That was the answer, the solution to keeping it temporally in that time, and to adding more of my own voice.
Yes, it's incredible, and I would advise you to go to her website to kind of dig through the crates of her earlier writings, because she's continued to write, but just that, The Source and Vibe magazine and, writing for the Village Voice, like, these are key publications. And to that note, it is amazing that you include so many writers. Of course, they're around, but I want to just give a shout out to, and I hope I pronounce her name correctly, Kierna Mayo, Greg Tate, of course, Michael Gonzalez, Bones Malone, right? Like, you don't have Joan in there, but Joan Morgan is being part of that. And, not necessarily like hip hop criticism, I guess it is, but it's just sort of like cultural criticism, especially as you're coming out of school, of bell hooks as well. And, it was great to see you hold space for that voice, for that writing voice, because you would easily write about Wu-Tang, and you did beautifully, but then also about Cassandra Wilson in that time, which I think is important, that you've never been solely focused on hip hop, right?
I mean, we were lucky. We were writing about Winnie Mandela. Like, I mean, that was I forget which of my friends from that era. I also don't believe there's such a thing as hip hop journalism. Like, we didn't invent a new kind of journalism. In fact, rock and roll journalism may have been like its own genre, like what they were doing at Cream, what Lester Bangs and them were doing, and Bones Malone might be a Lester Bangs, but then that's not even true. Like I think about like the immersion stuff that like Baraka was doing, like being actually in community with these folks. I think about Nat Hentoff, like Mingus punching Nat Hentoff in the face. I think about like, so none of that is also like, so there's this way that we act as if hip hop journalism is a lane, and it isn't. But what it gave me permission to do at the time was to talk about the rape case at St. John's in Queens, a university where the basketball players had raped a student. It gave me a chance to talk about the way that Winnie Mandela was being talked about in the mainstream press. And yeah.
There were moments where I was actually scared for you. I was like, ooh, like you are out here saying, well, why y'all niggas are out here planking, right? And I was like, can you, like, but that sense of danger that I felt is not good, right? What is it a reflection of? And so you talk about what it means to be in that space as a woman. You're in the car with Biggie, like the conversation you had with Method to me felt tense. And I'd be curious if you want to talk about that moment with Method that you had that was, quite, I think, aggressive.
You mean the one that was on the film?
No.
Or just throughout?
Both. Who was it who approached you and pushed? There was a physical
no.
exchange.
No, we never had a
You
physical.
no one from Wu-Tang?
No, someone from Wu-Tang punched Cheo Coker in the face.
Okay.
Killer Priest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Method Man, I broke up Leaders of the New School because I wrote a review that said that Busta was the star. That's like water is wet or whatever. And so I saw Busta, and he was like upset about it. He was like, "It just came out at the wrong time, son." And in that review, I compared Method's voice to Busta's voice, that they had the same quality. And then when I saw RZA, he was at the office at the Source for some reason, and he was like, "Meth wants to stab you," or whatever. And so then I'm at LAX, and I see Method Man, and I'm like, "I heard you want to stab me." Like, here I am. And whatever. I didn't get stabbed. But in that, we start off in the car arguing about a moment with Big, something that happened. To me, the best Wu-Tang album is Only Built for Cuban Links. On that album, there was a back and forth skit about Biggie, and I was like asking him about that. Later on the boat, we are having an argument that, like, Fat Man Scoop just died on stage, right? Like, doing what I guess he loved. I think it's a terrible way to go, but I understand. I know jazz drummers who play, like Elvin Jones, like, did a gig, went to bed, and died, right? Like, if I would never in my life have a conversation about 5%ers and gender right now. Like, what if I dropped dead in the middle of that conversation? Like, if that's the last conversation I had, like, shoot me, right? Like, come to my funeral and shoot me, right? So I would never waste my time or my breath talking to men in this moment in 2024 about Earth and sun, who's the Earth and who's the sun. And I would never, ever waste my time doing that. And so much of what I'm doing in the film, I actually now consider a waste of time. I'm like, yeah, because what I thought was that we were in a project of growing together. I thought we were in a project of building together. And what I know now is that they are doubling and tripling down on patriarchy. That it wasn't, that they were down to have an anti-racist framework, but there was never going to be real conversations about gender. And so now I would never waste my breath, lest I drop dead in the middle of the conversation. And that was the last thing I was doing when I could have been listening to like a Dinah Washington record. So,
Hello. Oh my God. No, that is much more to, or Betty Carter. But also, right. I'm like, but you say something powerful, and I'm gonna get back to something else. But just that, like, Miriam Makeba leaves the stage and dies. Tammy Terrell dies on stage.
right.
Mahalia Jackson leaves the stage and dies. Like that.
Yeah, doing what you love until the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's a
like,
beautiful thing. And
and also,
talking to men about patriarchy is not
yeah,
what I love.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's not gonna, yeah, and we don't
Yeah.
want you to, right, that's not what we want for you. But a lot of people want you to talk about it. And so Puffy is in this film, Russell Simmons is in this film, Biggie is in this film. We witness Biggie's relationship with Lil' Kim. It's uncomfortable. What do you make of this moment, this
Yeah.
so-called like, hip hop Me Too reckoning?
Right.
Where are you with it? And I know people reach out to you and want to hear where you're from,
Well,
where you at.
yeah. Don't forget that Snoop is in this record.
And
I mean, in this film, Snoop,
doing.
because it brings up a question of likability, right? Like we all like Snoop, right? Uncle Snoop,
Absolutely, Olympic Snoop.
Olympics Snoop, Snoop who will sell you anything with a barcode.
Martha Stewart's
Yeah,
Speedway.
I'm sure he'll sell you pool cleaning equipment, a car battery. I don't know. But he also talked about when he was hanging out with Bishop Don Juan, he was actually sex trafficking, right? He was selling women, he was pimping. And there was a lovely Eritrean family who lost their 19-year-old son when he approached the car to interview, to get an autograph from Snoop, and his bodyguard killed him. And then Snoop performed Murder is the Case at the MTV Awards with a casket on stage. And the family was like, well, that's the final straw. But the difference is that we have always loathed Puff, but we decide that we like Snoop, right? So in some ways, these conversations aren't interesting to me, but if people are interested in what I have said, because while I submit this like love letter to hip hop, I finished it last June, Cassie's suit against Puff comes out in October. And so then I've spent the time promoting this film, having to answer questions about Puff. Someone who I knew in his 20s. When I knew him, he would drink Baileys and be smashed drunk. He was such a straight edge teetotaler, like, you know what I mean? He thought that we were, like, as a true capitalist, he thought that we were wasting our times by wasting time by smoking weed, like me and Biggie. But the question, so if you're interested in what I have to say about Puff, I've said it to CNN, I've said it to Rolling Stone, I've said it to about 17 different magazines. You can just put my name in and Diddy, and it'll come up. And I resent having to answer a question about him in this moment because A, I haven't got my thoughts together, and B, I have never needed celebrity to talk about coercion, abuse, and rape. Obviously, the husband in France, and one of the tenets of patriarchy is provision and protection, right? Two of the big tenets of patriarchy are protection and provision. And you have this wife whose husband was drugging her, and everything that's happening in France right now. That trial today, the defense mounted its claim and began counter-arguing her. So for those of you who are following it, so I imagine if you're following Diddy, then you're interested in questions of gender violence, so you're also following the case in France, and you know that she was on the stand today and being subjected to questions about a woman who was passed out, a woman who her rapist found her on a site called Without Her Knowledge, and she's being questioned about whether or not she enjoyed it and whether or not she knew, right? So that's happening right now, that like second and third trauma and abuse of her. And I don't need some small town in France that I've never heard of to look at these questions, I haven't been to my family Thanksgiving for the past 8 years because my brother tried to run over his wife with his Suburban, you know? And my mother still sits him at the head of the table. So maybe I'm the only family, for the person who knows a man who's abusive. No one raise your hand, but I can raise. I have family and friends. I have known men who are on a spectrum of abusiveness. So I talk about hip hop as a failed project, but I'm beginning, and this is so super sunny, but I'm beginning to talk about men as a failed project. So.
Did y'all hear that? I don't know. I just want to be able to repeat that just because she said it a few hours ago, and it's in my heart. I'm like, damn, my dad, true, my brother, damn. It's like, no, but actually, that's a serious thing to say, right? That men are a failed project, possibly hip hop, depending on what the dream was. But you do an incredible thing, which
But I don't want to, what is germane to the film, and I don't want to skip over this question because it's important. It must have been uncomfortable for you to be watching that scene with Biggie and Kim, right? I don't remember it being like uncomfortable. I remember it being a little bullying, like I remember him being frustrated with her. What he's saying to her, and I know the audio isn't clear, is he's talking to her about she has to be camera ready at all times, right?
and why she's wearing the lipstick.
And she's ignoring him, like a very hood way of like dealing with someone that you don't, and then he takes the chair and kind of does that. So I think about a couple things in that moment. I'm looking at when I saw this footage, which I don't remember having shot that, right? I remember thinking, wow, I kept the cameras rolling. Like that was interesting to me that from a distance, because it's quite TMZ, right? It's quite paparazzi what I did in that moment. It's unlike the other moments in the film, right? And so therefore, is it exploitative of Kim, right? And so I kept the camera rolling. These are all questions I had to ask myself in the edit, right? But it was also evidence of what she described, and like most women, was disbelieved, foremost by his mother. Like my mother, who still sits my brother at the head of the table on Thanksgiving, even after he tried to run over his wife with his Suburban. Biggie's mother went on Hot 97 and said, "Christopher never touched Kimberly. And I was like, that's not true, Miss Wallace. Me and Biggie had a huge falling out when he told me about an argument that they got in and he put a gun in her mouth, right? And so to be in relationship with cishet men is to, if your feminism looks like confronting these things, sometimes in the moment, I'm not always proud of I'm giggling, I'm smoking weed. I'm not saying that I'm some hero. There are times when I'm talking back, as Belle phrased it, or black people have always phrased it. And then there are times when I'm unsure of what to do, when my 23-year-old self is unsure of how to react in the moment. So it wasn't like I was wearing some cape, like I was some hero. Yeah.
No, thank you for that vulnerability, though. That's honest and important.
Yeah.
Because I saw that awkwardness and appreciated how you, just held that complexity, I think, for yourself and for Biggie. Because I was like, how are you going to hold this rape comment, right? And you were just like, yeah, just kind of on some should I don't know, but I'm going to let you know that doesn't feel good to me, ultimately. That's why I'm saying, watching you navigate that space. But, I just have I'm thinking of Pecola as a character, a main character in Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I'm thinking of Lil' Kim. And I think of Pecola, and I think of Michael Jackson. And I think of Michael Jackson, and I think of Joe Jackson. And, being told that you're ugly, being told that you don't have enough breath. I'm curious about, because I also appreciate how Lil' Kim engages you, very much so, hey, Dreamy, but I don't have my, just
But then also, I hope that y'all see that I gave her moment I was also giving myself props for having got up on stage through a sea of men.
Yeah, yeah.
But like
You
when,
did.
right, when
Yeah.
she like gets up there, she actually tears down the whole club,
does.
right? So she does have the hero moment in that moment. Yeah, I mean, you can think of your own life, when someone has said something that was wildly transphobic, when, someone said something that like just made you feel uncomfortable, when someone said something witnessing relationships, period. One of my least favorite things to do is go out with couples, You want to talk about like cultures, you know what I mean? You're like witnessing the culture of someone's household when you're trying to like have dinner. It's like one of the rudest things. Like, I get why the upper class English like don't seat spouses next to each other. I'm like, I'm just trying to they asked us if we want sparkling or still. Like, what the fuck are y'all talking about right now? Like, what is this little micro beef from 3 years ago that I have to, you know?
No, but you put it there first. No,
Right.
but I just want to just for a moment though, just take a moment with the Pecola reference because Toni Morrison writes about, being driven to a level of insanity by the sort of European standards of beauty, right? And so that's why I was just curious
No,
about.
I understand that with Kim. I don't want to project that onto her. I remember me and Greg Tate were talking about Michael Jackson, and I hear you, and I think that's a brilliant reference, and I love that you threaded that. I'm sorry I didn't give that a beat. No, seriously, but I remember Tate introducing me to a phrase, and now I can't remember it, but it means that you're addicted to surgery. So it has something, and it's a disorder. But it has less to that, and so he was offering it as a possibility because we make decisions about people based on whatever. It could be a prosecutor's indictment, like we're all doing right now with, what do folks call him again? Diddy is what you call him now, or based on their presentation, with Kim and the way that her looks morphed, and we're not wrong that there's this European standard of beauty. I thought that Kim was beautiful back then. Yeah.
We don't have, that answers my question. I mean, but I am someone who felt relief when Michael passed because of how it affected me to see him based on what I was projecting, whatever
It was
like,
torture. It was awful. Yeah. And that's how I feel about hip hop. That's exactly how I feel about hip hop.
That's real.
I mean, I didn't like. I don't want to make jokes about it, but because when you're wearing velour suits in 2020, anything in the 21st century, like I'm also like, what are you doing, right? Like, and so then for some reason, I'm not surprised that you're, coercing women and like you're stuck in a mindset. Like there's a refusal. It's watching, so the disappointment extends, to the generation of men that I grew up with, watching them double down on stuff like patriarchy means that they find themselves in bed with like Steve Bannon or Donald Trump. And everyone's like, how did this happen? Like, why, how is Stick from Dead Prez? In the earliest days of Twitter, he tweeted out, we need a straight People's History Month.
Okay, beat it.
This is supposed to be, he has an anti-capitalist analysis. He has a white supremacy, an analysis around white supremacy. He has a Pan-Africanist. I've sat around with him and read the texts of Jonathan and George Jackson. Read Emile Cabral with him, But you're asking why there's not a straight People's History Month. That was one of his first tweets. So when Lord Jamar then comes in, over the past 2 years tweeting out his homophobic shit, or when, Killer Mike does a photo op with Brian Kemp a couple of days before Stacey Abrams' campaign, all of these moments that are like popping up are all connected to me,
Ice Cube and Trump,
Right.
Kanye and Trump, Lil Wayne and Trump, like Eddie Griffin and Trump, Tyrese and Trump. I'm like, this is.
And this is Trump, the candidate. This isn't Trump, the like gaudy, gauche person with a gold toilet, which is, was bad enough.
But what is also excellent is the space, I don't want to say that you give, but that is created or that includes women, right? First of all, seeing Nikki D and having that conversation and talking about the ways in which women are subjected to the narratives created by men, right? And these young boys you reference. But I just want to say thank you for bringing boss into this conversation, but also you all just wanting to acknowledge the fact that Dream was one of the directors of an incredibly thorough documentary called Ladies First, a story of women in hip hop. She directed, what is that, episode 3 or 4?
Three,
Three?
and I was the EP across all
And
four.
the EP, right? Which gets into your role as, we'll talk about that, networker. But, and also a shout out to Stas the Boss, who, what created a score, some
Who
of the music for
composed
the
the
film,
music
right?
for all the film, yeah.
So, yes, I mean, I'm wanting to say thank you for that and having the opportunity as a B girl, as a person who grew up as a DJ, to see myself in your film protected in this way. And yeah, that was just critically important. And the other thing that it made me think about is the fact that your film comes with many ghosts in terms of who is no longer with us, including Boss, including Great
Hurricane,
Tape,
Gloria, yeah.
Guru, Shy, I think the photographer, which I didn't know that.
DJ K. Slay, Chimo Du,
Prodigy,
one
you
of the
said?
members of Onyx, which I didn't
Oh,
know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right, so
So, yeah,
Yeah.
America, where black people die early.
dying prematurely, afterlife of slavery business, shout out Saidiya Hartman. I'm also super curious about, you have me thinking about Geneva Smitherman, not just because she's from Detroit, but also because you managed to kind of capture regional language. I'm thinking of this one interesting moment with Snoop where you're like, look at you with the Carl Kanai, like what happened to the T-shirts in the back? And he's like, no, I'm just saying this is for Shizzy, this is a good dizzy, my dizzy, or something, right? And I'm like, again, this place of like, this question of place and language and place and sound, which then takes us to Boston, sort of, through Guru, who is in Brooklyn, then brings in the conversation of jazz, right? So I want you to talk a little bit about what your listening practice looks like, just to kind of help us escape Dream as hip hop person who's not listening broadly. Like, what is your listening
Yeah,
practice?
I mean, you brought up Ladies First. I mean, I'm loving Doechii right now, you know. And I tend, as a writer, I hear lyrics first. So that a part of what became aesthetically uninteresting to me was the turn away from that as like a principle, kind of organizing principle of the music. But you know, I grew up in a rock and roll city. So, I mean, you know how Spotify tells you the truth at the end of the year? And for me, it's always like Jack White. um, every year is Jack White. And like, you know, and he just put out a wonderful album off label. And I'm always listening to jazz from around the world. I try to listen. I'm always listening to you. Like my SoundCloud is always you and those mixes that you've done, bringing in the connection between house music and what's happening and has been happening in South Africa. So I mean, music is so important to me. It's how I understand the world. It means everything to me. It has never been narrow, you know, in terms of, I mean, even the music I was listening to with people back then. Like I can remember going with Guru. Guru lived around the corner from me, Keith. He used to cut my hair. And I remember going to see Amal Jamal with him. You know, like, I feel like Biggie, we went to go see Luther Vandross together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so music is everything to me. My practice is to always have it on. I'll often listen to KCRW.
That's what I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. You also say something interesting because it dawned on me that you don't have Tupac in the film, right?
Yeah.
And you're on the ferry, I think, and you're like, I kind of regret not having him, but to have him on camera would be a bit redundant because he's sort of always on stage. Can you talk a little bit about how you?
Yeah, when I did Hellraiser, which was the cover story I did on Tupac, I didn't finish that thought. So I did Snoop. My two big cover stories for Source magazine were Tupac and Snoop. Snoop first and then Tupac. And the reason that they sent me out to do those, I was still talking about the regionalism of the office culture. And the reason they sent me out to do them because they were dismissive. Tupac had a very bad record called Brenda's Got a Baby. It was awful by any measure. And so they were dismissive of him. But I was like, no, he's a star. Like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to talk to him. Tupac and I were in the same organization, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. A lot of the organizing that I was doing at the time was to free political prisoners, of whom his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, was one of those people, including Sekou Odinga, including Sundiata Acoli. And so I knew Tupac because we would organize. In fact, the very first concert that we did, so Assata Shakur, I did a film called Black August. Assata Shakur is in that film. We used to take people on delegations to places like Cuba. This is how you get Common's record, A Song for Assata, because we took him down there to meet her. And on one of those trips to Cuba, Assata asked us to use hip hop, which she mistakenly thought was revolutionary, to organize concerts around political prisoners. And so we were charged by Assata to do that work. The very first concert that we raised, that we put on to raise funds for political prisoners was Biggie performing at the South Oxford Tennis Club for Mutulu. Wow. And so anyway, Tupac, I introduced Biggie and Tupac also. Biggie was uptown at a place where he used to buy crack to sell, because when I met him, he was still selling drugs. And I was on a video shoot. I was producing a video for Tupac, called Uptown Anthem for Naughty by Nature, and Tupac was there, so I was like, you guys should meet, you're both Geminis. And so Biggie came by and they met. Tupac was, that time when I was doing Hellraiser, when I'd gone out to California to interview him, he had 6 cases, among them a rape case. You know, again, we decide who we like and don't like, right? Tupac and I got thrown out of a restaurant because we got into an argument about his sexual assault case. That's all in this article, Hellraiser. But during that process, I never pulled out my micro cassette recorder. Because to turn a device on in front of Tupac was to put him, he was a theater kid. I mean, if you grew up in a household, if you are a theater kid, it's like, you know, you're trying to have dinner and your child's like performing. He was performative, you know? And so when you turned on a camera, or when you turned on a device, he would get into Tupac mode. The same thing happened with Meth. Like when we are in the car, I'm getting a particular kind of conversation with Meth. When my camera person comes and meets us at the actual ferry, Meth starts shouting out all of Wu-Tang. He starts being Method Man, right? So Tupac, it was really, he would always turn that on, and I didn't want that from him. So what I was saying about it be redundant to shoot him is that he was just annoying in that way. Yeah.
That's fair.
I know people love the idea of Tupac or whatever.
The idea. That's real. Well, I want to wrap up and I want to open up the, space for questions. But the one thing that I do want to acknowledge too is you as a kind of pattern master, which I think, I don't know if you all heard like who she's saying she introduced, right? Like to help, there's like a body of work around her introductions alone that show up at her dinner table. So when she moved to LA, the honor I felt to be invited to a Dream Hampton dinner where you would meet people from, around my city and around the world. Right, meeting Jen and Kuru there, meeting, John from Ghetto Gash. Just like incredible people, but also hosting those same sort of round tables around food, culture in Detroit, right? In Martha's Vineyard, sorry to say that, but I've been to all of them, and in Venice, Italy, right? Like showing up as a guest, as an international local in other people's city and bringing people together that then help to sort of generate production companies, films, connections, partnerships, who knows, right? Truly responsible, like, for curating so much of what we know about hip hop in the 90s, right? So just please give it up for Dream one more time. Do we have any questions? Anyone? Do you want to take it? Do you want to?
First of all, thank you so much for sharing about all your experiences, your stories. This was amazing to hear and to witness. I took a lot of notes, so I'm trying to form a coherent question, but there will be an introduction. Because we already briefly touched upon like the abuse and everything that has been coming to the surface. And a few months ago, or maybe 2 months ago, I read this beautiful story from Danielle Smith. She used to be the editor-in-chief of Vibe magazine. It was a story in New York Times, like a very deeply self-reflective piece that offers a lot of like nuance and insight in the complexity of being a woman, being a black woman. And she had a very powerful position where she got amazing opportunities that no one else got. And also how we deal with trauma. Like she wrote that people had to tell her about her story, about what she has experienced because she forgot or she actually like pushed it away, right? And I'm wondering, since the past years things have been coming to the surface, how has the process been for you? Like recollecting, maybe questioning yourself even, and also, did you have conversations with other women about the things you maybe or other women experienced? And what were those conversations like? For now, I'll leave it at that.
Often you get, and being ambitious is considered an insult to women, so I don't want, when I think, Danielle was conventionally ambitious around, like she had a powerful job where she made decisions and she was in an industry like that she cared about, and that's not my experience, you know? I maybe have had 2 or 3 jobs in my adult life. I don't desire a job. I don't have ambitions for that kind of, and this is in any space. This is in the academy. This is in whatever kind of place that you may work, right? And so I say that to say, and this, it's gonna sound like a cop-out, but I never went to Puff's part. I never went to an all-white party. I never went to a Rock Nation brunch. Not because I wasn't invited, but because I just have always thought I was way cooler than them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna dress up alike in all fucking white or whatever corny shit you're doing, right? You know what I mean? Like, I thought his house was awful. It was like, it was architecturally like so offensive, his house. I remember that because I went to I got kicked off the video set because of the way that the girls in this Jodeci video were not being cared for. I remember that, so I have that recollection. But I didn't bury it and then 30 years later, something happened, you know? Like, I literally said something in the moment. Like, why are these girls just came out of the hot tub, don't y'all niggas have robes? Why the fuck are they shivering? And Puff was like, you need to leave. So who brought Dream? Like, send her home, right? So like, I remember one time he made his assistant cry and I went in the other room and cursed him out. And then he went back and was like, you can't be crying in front of Dream, that's Harriet Tubman. And I was like, are you saying that they're slaves? Like, so that is like, I'm in this moment, I'm giving myself props, right? I'm doing this other thing that I hate, like, which is, if I hate when people punish women for being ambitious, I hate when women think of themselves as the exception, right? But it's not untrue that when you are a particular, it could have something to do with how you look, like there's pretty privilege, there's like the idea of like being in the space. But the idea of like getting entry into a space by being conventionally attractive, that agreement requires that you be silent. So I always ruin that agreement if I ever had that, you know what I mean? By talking. And so I talked back in the moment. I don't have a thing where 30 years later, and I hope that this is evidence of that, like the film is evidence of that. I'm not saying that I always got it right, but I didn't wake up and say, oh my God, hip hop was so, and neither did Joe Morgan, and neither did Kierna Mayo. Kierna Mayo deplatformed Akinyele when he did Put It in Her Mouth. Joan Morgan was writing about Ice Cube's death certificate in the moment. She was reporting from Indiana from the Mike Tyson trial. So it's not like we looked back and said, Oh my God, we were partying to records like, the B-side of Gin and Juice, which was Bitches Ain't Shit But Hoes and Tricks. And what did that mean? We were thinking about that in the moment. And so this work isn't easy to access because people like Vibe and the Village Voice don't keep necessarily great digital archives. But we were talking back to this genre of music in the moment. The places where I failed were the first places where I learned that lesson that bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks. And that was in church. So I didn't learn that bitches weren't shit but hoes and tricks from Snoop. I learned it from the book of Genesis. I learned that this dumb bitch like ate an apple. We would all still be in Eden if this dumb bitch didn't eat an apple. This dumb bitch looked back, turned to a pillar of salt. This one couldn't give her husband a wife, so bring on the handmaid's tale. So everything I needed to know about misogyny and patriarchal culture and how awful women are, I learned from the first 3 books of the Bible. And so, and then any journey that I had through any of the Abrahamic religions, which I had at least a relationship with Islam for about 25 years, any of the relationship that I had with any of the Abrahamic religions, all of that was right there. And so did I fail in my church when my uncle stood up one day and told the women in the church that there's a verse in Timothy that says men can't learn from women, so therefore we're no longer going to have Sunday school because none of the men were about to step forward and take over the Sunday school classes. Did I say something then? Did I say something when we then had my grandmother's funeral at his church where he had kicked her out of leadership? No, I didn't speak up in those spaces, and that I regret more than anything I've done in hip hop. And the same when it comes to some of the more lewd and salacious stuff. I mean, I don't know, if you're not married, you don't get invited to the married swingers parties or whatever they're doing. I've never been invited to an orgy. I've never been invited to do cocaine. I've never seen anyone do cocaine. Everyone knows that I'm a weed head. So I don't know, and I'm not trying to be I'm not trying. The other thing that men do, and you probably are younger than me, but they will become cliches. So there comes a time when after 35, you are invisibilized anyway in their world, and they begin dating 22 and 23-year-olds and doing whatever drugs they're doing. And then I'm not even in your world. I don't, you get, I guess there's a Hollywood movie about it, The First Wives Club. But I divested from those spaces long before they were uninterested in me. I found them deeply boring. I found them offensive and dangerous and all the other things. Did I have any idea? I think that a lot of what's going on around the conversation around Puff is also not interesting. When it's about kink shaming, when it's about homophobia, those conversations the conversation is about coercion, abuse, and rape. And I can, again, have those conversations without celebrity. So as a young person growing up, did I witness all kinds of things in the very poor neighborhood that I'm from, Detroit? And then in New York, did I witness all kinds of abuse? Sure. Did I have all kinds of responses to it? Sure. Am I holding it in my body now? Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I think we could.
I'm so sunny. The film is really a love letter. I'm sorry that but the current moment, I guess, requires that you speak to it. But I did it. The film is from 93 to 95. And I really, I thought I was in community, and I thought we were on this project to be disruptive, to disrupt systems as well as aesthetic, to disrupt sound. I thought that we were trying to tear something down to build something new. I'm sure that if you were a punk rocker, I lost a toenail at the Slayer concert, even when I was wearing my Doc Martens. So whatever thing that you had, and then you're like, oh my God, you're a friggin' whatever you are now, all of that. But that's about celebrity. We just can't look to individuals to deposit our things. And that goes for whoever, we can't make celebrities out of Biko, out of Cabral, out of Malcolm, out of whomever, out of Bell or whatever. So, because we're here to disappoint each other.
But also, I mean, go ahead.
No.
I mean, I do want to acknowledge that this is actually an extremely fun person. Like, it's just like, I know that, I mean, like, it's interesting that you're like, no, it's Sunny, the film is about a love letter, but also I think you're witnessing the role of humor in her analysis, which is really important and absolutely a part of a Black radical tradition. Right?
Only humor if you think the bear is funny, which no one thinks the bear is a comedy. I'm like at home cracking up, like, it's hilarious. And everyone's like, no, it's the drama.
So, no, but so.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so
Bye,
much
Tina,
for
thank you so
coming.
much. If you guys are deep, crate diggers the way I am, I'm just telling you, go to her website. She's made incredible films and television series beyond the R. Kelly work, right? Also films about a series about place, what's happening in Baltimore with I mean, just like so many things for you all to kind of draw from, learn, ask questions, think with. And I just want to give a shout out to Aruna and to the Hip Hop House for inviting me to be part of this conversation, for having this gorgeous space.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Ernestine, yeah.
Oh, I mean, listen. Ernestine knows that I say thank you every time I'm in a public space for just like the work you've done in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands in general, and also globally what you mean. I mean, hello and thank you and welcome always.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
So thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much.